Hello and welcome to Rich, Simple Human. Today I'm sitting down with Michele Paradise, and this is going to be a fascinating conversation. It's one I've been waiting for ages, and I'm super excited about. And of course, the more research I did, the more topics I found I want to dive into. So without further ado, Michele, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. What people should know is you're a trauma informed therapist and relationship coach with over 20 years of experience. And that in itself sets the bar super high. Michele, I just wanted to start by asking you to give yourself a very quick introduction because I've got loads of exciting questions to ask you. So over to you.
Well, Lindsay, let me thank you for inviting me on because I've been looking forward to this as well because I know it's going to be a fascinating conversation with you. Yes, 20 years. I started actually with my own issue. It was very simple. I was at the time I was a catwalk model and I was smoking and I didn't want to be smoking. So I mentioned it and a makeup artist said to me, "Oh, I know this guy on Harley Street." So I went and saw him and he did some hypnosis and some other things. Anyway, it turned out to be neurolinguistic programming. So he hooked me up on a course that was a couple weeks later with Paul McKenna and Dr. Richard Bandler, who is the co-creator of NLP. And I did my training up to becoming a trainer, and then I assisted them for about 10 years on their training courses. At the same time, I studied hypnotherapy, became a clinical hypnotherapist, and that dovetailed beautifully with NLP. And along the way, I was introduced to havening techniques, which is a psychosensory therapy, similar to EMDR. However, there's less of taking the client into the trauma. It can actually be content free, which I love. and then along the way, because I'm always wanting to learn, I'm just very curious. So along the way, I went to a talk by Dr. Gabor Mate in London about 7 years ago. Yeah, 2018. And I was absolutely fascinated by him and realized I'd read one of his books previously. And, you know, I'm sure you can relate to this. You do a lot of learning and reading, and then you meet somebody or you meet a methodology, and it's like, that is the key to the door that I've been looking for. And that's how I felt. So I started training with him in 2019, and it was all online because very quickly COVID hit and lockdowns and all that, which was a great way to spend lockdowns. And he then introduced us to Dr. Richard Schwartz. So Gabor Mate's technique is called compassionate inquiry, which is exactly that. You go inside and inquire compassionately with self. But he also introduced us to Dr. Richard Schwartz, who does internal family systems. And just very briefly, that means that in the old days, you would bring the whole family into the room and everybody would get a chance. And he realized that they're all inside of us anyway, so we don't have to have them there physically. We need to work with our parts, and that brings me up to date now. And I'm still learning. I love, the basis of my work is around attachment theory, which is Dr. John Bowlby, who is a really fantastic British psychologist. So shout out to him. And I think Mary Ainsworth, his wife, they worked together and they really developed attachment theory, which
Good.
is for me the foundation of just about everything I do.
Michele, that's beautiful to hear that in such a concise way because I am a fan of many of those pieces of work. And although I'm a sophrologist, of course, a lot of this comes up relationship with self, attachment, and that incredible integration of parts, especially when we start looking at how people talk to themselves and the voices that they're listening to. Um, I'm going to dive straight in and ask you about trauma because it's a term we hear a lot. And we're also going to talk about narcissism today. They are quite big, scary words, and I use them lightly because they do have interesting connotations. But I am seeing clients again and again and again talk to me about these issues. And I would love to know, first of all, how do you define trauma? And can you give me some common misconceptions about how people are using the term or understanding what it might mean?
Well, I'm going to start with not answer your question directly, and then I will, because what I was going to say is 10 years ago, if I was out at an event and said I was a trauma therapist, it would clear the room. Okay. Now it's my daughter's having a problem. Can I talk to you about it? So I it's wonderful that we now talk about it. That's my first comment. Trauma actually comes from a Greek word, and it means wound. That's
Mm.
it. And there's I will say in my world, because this is about the way I work, and I won't say that again because I think once is enough. In my opinion, there are small T traumas and big T traumas. And big T traumas would be like car accidents, hurricanes, um, sexual abuse, things like that. But small T trauma is what I think, as I see the trauma work now, which is very, very exciting. It's a very exciting time. Is about these underlying simmering things. So there's a diagnostic test. It's not that comprehensive, but it's called the ACE test, and it stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And this really, un, uncovers childhood developmental trauma, which is small t. So trauma means wound, and vulnerable is another Greek word, vulnerable, which means to be wounded. So that's why so many of us are afraid to be vulnerable, because who wants to get wounded? We're already wounded. I think I can pretty much say that every human being has some sort of woundedness. And I'm not blaming parents. I'm not looking for problems. I'm just saying that, and maybe when I unpack that a little bit more, it'll make sense. So on the ACE test, it'll be questions like before the age of 18, did you experience? And there's 10 questions. It's not that totally comprehensive, but it'll be things like, was anyone in your family addicted? Was there any addictions? Did anyone in your family have mental health issues? Did anyone in your family go to prison? Um, were you neglected in any way? Did you have enough food and clothing and things like that? These are things that people didn't used to think about. And now this test, I'm delighted to say, I think it needs a bit more work, but it is used now as a baseline assessment for children coming into schools. Certainly in California, I lived in California, it's mandatory. And I understand here now in the UK that it's being used as well. So it gives the teaching staff a baseline assessment of what the child is coming in with. And anything above 4 yeses, because they're just yes or no questions, is concerning. Okay, there can be things like it can lead to addiction, mental health issues, physical health issues, um, autoimmune diseases. It's just very significant, and we kind of overlooked this for a long time. I think it's been around about 20 years, which is very young um, in this business. But it's gained a lot of momentum, and it really does help. So I give it to all of my clients as an intake. So my intakes are definitely ACE scores, and also whether they're a highly sensitive person, because that has, we're probably not going to go into at the moment, but anyway, very interesting topic that does change the direction of how you work with a client. I hope
That's
that answered your question.
no, it absolutely does, Michelle, because you're right. When I hear the word trauma, I feel myself physically going, oh, trauma, oh, let's not talk about it. And being English, of course, and there is this sort of stiff upper lip, and there's also a sort of a bit of a concept as a parent. Well, if my child's turning up with trauma, it must be my fault, or am I a victim? Where's the blame? It becomes quite a complicated mental conversation. And when we're talking about those voices in our heads, the integration of parts, there is a bit of a battle that I notice in myself. The reality is, Michelle, at your and our age, if we just looked at our physical bodies, we have bumps and bruises. We might have a few little scars, and these are the things we pick up during life, both physically, mentally, and emotionally. And none of us are, looking the same as we did when we were, newborns. We pick up these traumas along the way, these wounds. And because of my work is focused around consciousness, and sophrology is the study of consciousness in harmony, it's that awareness that you talk about. Once we're aware of it, we can deal with it. But if we're not aware, we're just basically in the dark.
Awareness is everything. And what I should have also added is when a child is born, they have three basic needs. We have them all our lives, but sometimes it starts in utero, because I think that gets overlooked as well, because trauma can start in utero.
Mm.
But the three basic needs are to be seen, to be heard and to be accepted just the way you are, right? Um, and that sounds very simple. It's like, of course, my child, I see my child, I'm listening to my child, and I accept that child just the way but we don't, and our biggest fear as a child coming into the world is the fear of abandonment and rejection. And if you put that all together, it's very easy to have wounds because people say, oh no, this sounds, like I wasn't wounded. My parents were great. And I will use myself because I ethically never talk about clients because they might recognize themselves. So I was raised in a family where on the outside, nice house, not wealthy, but nice house, good education, two parents, food, clothing, all of that. But inside the house, my mother, I now know, was clinically depressed, and my father was a rageaholic. Now, I'm not blaming them for anything because if you look at their trauma, I can't believe they've even survived, that they even survived that long, to have their own family. So I get it. But because I didn't get it, all I felt on an implicit level, because I didn't really understand it, because we're not, our brain isn't fully formed to process these things until about 25, which is a lot of real estate, between being born and. So I didn't realize that my parents weren't emotionally attuned to me. They weren't emotionally attuned to themselves, right? So the way I describe it, I felt like, there was this nice house, but there was this plexiglass or glass wall, and my parents were on the other side of it, and we never really connected. So as soon as I could, I left. And I wasn't a runaway as such, but I felt implicitly that I had to get out of that family. Now, I wasn't really hit. I mean, if I was naughty, there would be the strap, because that was just culturally, and at that time, my father was Greek and it was very much part of his culture. And, but I was shouted at and, ignored and things like that. But I don't think my parents got up every morning and said, let me ruin my daughter's day. They just, that's what they knew. That's all they knew. And they were dealing with their own mental health or not dealing with their own mental health issues. So that's how trauma gets imprinted on a child between the ages of 1 and 3. Those are the most crucial ages. And Bessel van der Kolk and various other people say if you get the first 3 years right, then you're sailing. You'll sail through the rest of it. But that's hard. That's really hard.
Absolutely. And as a parent myself, I don't know how much other people think about this, but of course, none of us want to go out and damage our children. And I spend a lot of time with my friends talking about, I hope I've done this right, I hope I've done that right. That creates another level of hypervigilance, which is incredibly unhelpful. But I love what you said about, the trauma, but also what we do see is this new awareness of generational trauma, inherited
Yeah.
trauma that comes down through the family line. And I've been very lucky to have done some very interesting work on not only what I've inherited as trauma, but also what I've inherited as values and capacities that have been passed down. And that's helped balance it out a lot. So, yeah, I love this kind of work. Michelle, it's a really, really difficult conversation with people that aren't conscious. And I think I deal with some clients who do tell me their parents were truly wonderful. And I
Hmm.
sort of think, gosh, we're all human. And that there's something seems to happen in their 40s where they suddenly realize perhaps their parents weren't quite perfect, or they're perhaps dealing with elderly parents and teenage children at the same time, which
Yes.
I know
The
from
sandwich.
experience. Oh, the squeeze years. That's really hard for women. It creates a huge amount of anxiety, especially if it coincides with menopause. And in my experience for men, it creates, well, like you say, the rageaholic. It creates a lot of anger. These aren't fun times, but there are lots and lots of practitioners out there who are available for support, and you are one of them. Can I ask you, the next thing I see coming up is narcissism. And again, narcissism being a really terrible personality disorder, but also narcissistic behavior being slightly different. Would you mind unpacking that for the listeners so they could begin to understand what they're looking for?
Yeah. Again, I'll use myself. I now know that I was raised by a narcissistic father.
Mm,
Again, I don't blame him. I think what's happened with this word narcissism, because this is one of my areas that I go dive deep into, is that it's almost black and white. It's like a switch on or off. It's not like that. if I may take a moment to just explain how it develops in my opinion and understanding of it, is so we're born, and the first 3 years of our life, we really need attunement to the parents. Um, there, there are two very direct ways that a child becomes narcissistic. And by the way, the first year of our life, we are total narcissists. And that's exactly the way we're meant to be. We can't do anything for ourselves. We can't change our nappies, feed ourselves, even turn ourselves over. So that's the way it's meant to be. And we continue to have narcissistic um, traits for the rest of our lives. It's not a bad thing. But what happens to a child is around the age of 3, they're meant to begin to separate and individuate from the parent figure. And I will use that term because it's not always a biological parent, it could be, or it could be a grandparent, whoever's raised them. So that's what they're meant to do. But what happens now I'm not, there's NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, which is at the very extreme end of the spectrum. Okay. I'm going to be talking more about narcissistic personality style. So NPD, I think 1 to 2% of the population are NPD. But how do we know? Because people don't walk in and get assessments for this. In fact, they resist assessments for this. So there could be many more. The statistics could be higher. I think one in 5, 1 in 6 people have narcissistic personality style, which is quite high. If you look at a room, and there's 20 people in there, you could say 3 to 4 are going to be narcissistic personality style, if you look at it like that. So what happens is the child is meant to begin to separate, individuate, sort of move away from the parent figure and feeling safe, still tethered to the parent so they know they can come back. And there's a lot of secure attachment. So this will go back to attachment. And what happens with a person that becomes narcissistic personality style is they don't have that attunement, they don't have that safety, so their needs are not met. And what they do is they go out into the world and they start developing a personality trait where they realize that they can get their needs met from other people, which is very different than a people pleaser. And I will bring that in very quickly to understand that in a mo. So they go out and they're like, oh, I have all of these people out there. And I always have this little post-it note on my desk. I'll show you what I mean. So this will be the narcissistic person. And this is their supply wheel. And we're all just spokes on their supply wheel. And they will keep their supply wheel very healthy. And if someone isn't serving them, they will get rid of them and they will replace them and come back and things like that. It's a much bigger conversation. So there you are, the unmet needs end of the spectrum, let's say. That can lead to narcissistic personality style. The other end of the spectrum is what is called the golden child. So that child is in the likeness of the parent. Sometimes it's to do with the parents living vicariously through the child. So they wanted to go to Oxford and they didn't get in, or their family didn't have enough money. So their child is going to Oxford. I've actually had clients like this. And the child is melting down and has eating disorders and everything else. But the parent is adamant that this child is going to be in the likeness of them. So they might measure the love with them is transactional based on things like, are they academic? Are they athletic? Whatever the parent needs. This child is cocooned. This child is, the way I say, metaphorically, their feet don't touch the ground. Everything comes to them. So they live in this very unrealistic space of, I'm the center of the universe and everything comes to me. Why wouldn't they? So it's not the child's fault. And this is the problem, that the child gets imprinted with this personality trait, grows up, and then we're all like, you're a narcissist. I don't like narcissists. You're toxic, But it's about being able, and I'm jumping ahead here, it's about being able to to look through that. So I'll use myself as an example. My father, I now know, was narcissistic personality style. And I was very angry with him for years because of things he wouldn't allow me to do, like academically, scholarships and things like that. And we couldn't talk. It just wasn't something he was able to do with me. There was no emotional connection. So I spent a lot of my years being angry with him, not even knowing he was narcissistic. Then I started doing this work, realized what his personality was. And then I began to understand and look at his ancestral trauma, his generational trauma, which brings back to what you were saying, because this is where everything comes from.
Of course.
There's hardly anything that is genetic. It's all epigenetic. Most everything is epigenetic. So layers of generations. And I looked at my father and I began to have understanding and compassion for him. Unfortunately, he was deceased by the time this happened, but I sent him messages. And that changed everything for me because instead of being stuck and frozen in this anger towards this person that I now knew was a narcissist and how dare he ruin my life, I could see his inner child, his woundedness, his trauma, and realize that he did the best he could with what he had for me and for himself. And now I look at narcissist in a very different way. I do a lot of work around it. However, I always mention that it is important for those of us who, because I then got into several narcissistic relationships. I married a narcissist, which is not unusual because
Not at all.
you're modeling the first romantic relationship that you saw until you may do the work and undo some of that. And I was like, why why are all these men awful? And my very wise therapist said to me, who's the common denominator in all of these relationships? And I had to admit it was me. So actually, I had to do the work.
Yeah.
So I stopped attracting because these men weren't all bad. They were just not right for me. And we obviously brought out each other's woundedness. So I ended up coming back to people pleasing. I ended up becoming the people pleaser. So here was the narc, and I was like giving, giving, giving. And of course, the narc is taking, taking, taking. And that creates one of the most incredible trauma bonds. What a solid trauma bond in relationships. And we don't realize it. We don't realize we're in it. The best phrase I've ever heard around narcissism is a narcissistic relationship is best seen in the rear view mirror and not in the windscreen.
I love that,
So
Michelle.
true.
And I
Yeah.
must also remind people who are listening to go straight to your Instagram account because there are so many sound bites on there that have been really transformational for me. And you've got nearly 45,000 followers. Michelle, on Instagram, they can follow you. Michelle Paradise is your Instagram handle,
It's
is that right?
Michelle Paradise official, but my Michelle is Michele, one L. So look out for that. Yes, I'd love to engage with your listeners. I
Yeah.
do my best to respond to them and DMs and all of that because I have people that are, they're searching for that one little phrase, as you say, and I get messages a lot, which I'm absolutely grateful to the universe for. When people say, I needed to hear that today. That's why I do this.
And I really appreciate that because what's been happening in the, we'll call it the therapeutic space over the last few years, of course, is that this information that you and I are talking about, this knowledge, is being shared for free. You are doing a huge amount of work to put it out into the world free of charge, as am I. That's why the podcast exists. And it's lovely to work with clients one to one. I love that work. But it's also important that we start sharing this real need now to be conscious and aware of what happens. And I wonder how many listeners are now thinking, "Oh, I can identify myself in this as a people pleaser, perhaps in a relationship with a narcissist or somebody with narcissistic styles." And they begin to almost the veil begins to lift, the fog begins to clear because what happens, of course, in these situations when you are engaging with people, they're very intelligent and you begin to doubt yourself. Well, maybe it's me, maybe it's my fault, maybe I'm like you say, I'm the common denominator, I deserve this, I was an awful person.
Yeah.
And then you fall straight into victim mode and then you have no power at all. Michelle, slightly off my list of questions, but what do you say to clients when they do that, which I think they probably do to you? It's my fault. Well, I deserve it.
Yeah. That was me. I was that person. And so my tagline is the most important relationship is the one with yourself. And when I have a client like that, I get very excited because I know exactly where we need to go. We need to come back to self. We need to meet that child, whatever version of that child is, and we have many parts all of our parts are good. There are no bad parts, even if they don't seem to be doing good things with us or for us anymore. They always started out with fantastic, beautiful intention to protect us, our vulnerability, so that we didn't get wounded. So that's when I get very excited and very curious because and I want to say this because I think this is so important. It's one of my recent insights, and I don't think I'm alone. I think I think therapy right now is so exciting because I think the way it used to be, because I had a therapist years ago, so I feel confident to say this, is the therapist was like the guru. And they were
Mm.
fine, especially would sit in the wingback chair. I lie on the sofa. I couldn't look at them. They had a pad and a pen, and they would ask these questions. There would be these long silences. And I felt like they had all the answers. And I had to, think about the right thing or ask the right question to get the answer out of them. It's completely switched. And I find it so exciting because now, and always, I have none of the answers for my clients. Everything's inside of you.
Yeah.
My role is to guide you and ask you questions that unearth these. And that's the beautiful work around IFS and compassion inquiry is it's somatic as well. We cannot divorce the mind from the body. It is connected, what we think we feel. So we go inside and we meet the parts of self that come up. So a person that might say, I'm not good enough. I will do a bit of a archaeological dig, as I say, to find out, the first time they felt like that. Or, what is that? What is the emotion attached to that? And before you know it, we're now meeting that part. We're experiencing it in a sense or visceral way, and we start communicating with it. Because I think the biggest fear, I was talking to this about this to a colleague last night. The biggest fear we have is we have an emotion and we want to run away from it because we think it's going to be so devastating. But actually, to sit with that emotion and to meet that part, there's always joy underneath because there's this little child that, so I get emotional just talking about it, but there's this little child inside that it was like, I don't know why. Something didn't feel right. I needed to protect myself. So I developed this personality trait, which might be overachieving, fixer, life of the party, codependent, people pleaser, narcissist, whatever. They all came from really good intention. So when we go back and meet these parts, I really focus on the joyful aspect, the good intention of that part.
You take a very positive approach to this work, Michelle, and I really appreciate that because I have been working with psychotherapists personally for many, many years. And you described that traditional model that's actually, I didn't enjoy. And that sort of old, I don't want to say old fashioned, but the fact that you are using very modern approaches, that we get to talk about the mind and the body together. And of course, we don't have the answers. Our job, and we use this word in sophrology, is to accompany the client on their journey.
Nice.
And it's a beautiful, beautiful
Like
phrase. And
that.
it's amazing. Sophrology's been around since the 1950s.
Yeah.
Caicedo designed the method, and there's also the inner child work that we do, and it unfolds beautifully. This is not new stuff that you and I are talking about,
No,
but
it
it
is.
is a modern, fresh approach to just
Yeah.
becoming conscious of what's happened in the past, how is that affecting me now, and how can I make a change so I don't have to keep running away. And if you are a runner, and I have many athletes listening to this because I'm also an athlete myself, not professional, but that is the kind of caliber of people I seem to be attracting. Running is great, but if you are running because you're running away from your emotions and it makes you feel better, it's really worth being aware of that
Yeah.
because, as well as I do, Michelle, you can't be in rest and digest if you are in fight or flight running up, down and
Yeah.
down a mountainside. But we do want to escape. Of course, I don't want to sit with my emotions. I'd much rather drown them out with sugar, alcohol, or something else,
Mm.
Netflix, shopping.
Yeah.
But when we do, that's when the transformation really does occur. So thank you for sharing that.
May I just make a comment on something you said? We have this
Please.
meta model in NLP called toward and away from. I don't know if you're familiar with it. So it's a question you ask people when they're running, like you just said, are you running away from something or are you running towards something? And it's a really really like focuses people's mind because they're like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. And then they realize that they're probably running away from something, which is not great because you have no direction and no destination. So yeah, I just wanted to comment on that because it that was very much in the space that you were talking about. And do you think that runners, is there some sort of other underlying psychological aspect of that they've chosen that?
Well, I
You could
see
ask
a lot
the
of,
question now.
yeah, please do. I see a lot of clients who are, I would say, non-functional overreaching. So they're training for something, but they are
Right.
overtraining because they're actually addicted to the adrenaline it gives them.
Yeah.
And an addiction of any sort can be very unhelpful. Although, of course, when it's masked in a healthy behavior like exercise, people will have a conversation with themselves to justify it.
Yeah.
And if you are incredibly tired, running out of energy, and are angry or anxious, and you are training really hard, my suggestion is always, do you think you might be overtraining? And of course, I use biometric data. I watch people's heart rate variability and their resting heart rate. It's very obvious what's happening. They're just simply not being still and sitting with themselves enough. Um, the biggest challenge my clients have, Michelle, is being still because they want to be permanently moving so they can't feel anything.
Mm.
What do you say when you see clients that do that?
Well, I've just listened to an amazing podcast, and I'm embarrassed to say I don't remember her surname, but her first name is Erica. She's an American psychotherapist, and she was talking about this, specifically ADHD.
Mm.
And I might be a bit controversial here, but I'm going to say it anyway. I've had enough of hearing people say, I have ADHD. You do not have ADHD. It is not a thing. It isn't. It's a set of symptoms that we have packaged into, and I hope I don't offend anybody, but there's a lot of research on this, been packaged into this acronym. And I don't know if people understand why we have these acronyms, but it comes from America. Uh, to put the whole like a bipolar disorder into a tiny little box for insurance purposes, they collapse it into BPD or ADHD. I'm not minimizing this in any way, but this psychotherapist was talking about it, and it goes back to rest and digest and fight and flight. We we are not meant to be in fight and flight as much as we are. They are not saber-toothed tigers coming at us all the time, right? And she explains it so beautifully, and I'll do my best here, in that so rest and digest is where we want to be, parasympathetic nervous system. But a lot of times we spend a lot of time in sympathetic nervous system, which is fight and flight. Now, fight is obviously this, right? Flight is leaving, but she also calls it distraction. And this is
Mm.
what a lot of people that have been diagnosed with ADHD are experiencing. I need to get away. I need to distract myself. I can't sit still. And I appreciate that there is this label and people feel like, oh, now I understand it. But what I don't appreciate is that we medicate these people and we don't give them the real tools that they can use for themselves. Somatic work, heart rate variability would probably be a good thing. And we are dumbing them down and numbing them down. And she says she agrees with the first 3 years. She says, it's a very inconvenient truth, but a parent figure needs to stay with their child for the first 3 years of its life so that it doesn't get stressed out because ADHD is not a disease. It isn't even a disorder. It is a stress response.
That's
And
incredibly
that's my
helpful.
very unpopular probably because it
Well,
blows people's bubbles open. They're like, but I have ADHD. You don't. And the thing is, people begin to live to their labels. And I think it's very dangerous. Very dangerous.
I love that soundbite, Michelle. We begin to live to our labels.
We
I am
do.
the biggest victim of this. I love labeling myself with something. And then I step back because I have practiced self observation work a lot as a sophrologist. And I look at all the labels I've stuck all over myself. And I think, oh gosh, I think we should take some of those off. And of course, as you rip them off, they're quite sticky and they hurt. But I don't want to be covered in labels walking around. And my children were laughing at me the other day, telling me because I was married to a man, I had some sort of special label of, I can't even remember what label it was. And I was just laughing, like, don't be, I'm not having any more labels, get them off me. And it was it was a really challenging conversation, but you're so right. ADHD is a stress response, of
It
course.
is.
And I see that a lot in clients because women, I deal with women and men, women will often say, oh, I think I've got ADHD. Often it can be a hormone imbalance or it's the
Yeah.
fact that glucose is all over the place.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
love asking people to put a continuous glucose monitor on and, oh, look when you felt terrible and look when you woke up in the night and let's just work out what you're eating and what are you eating? Well, I'm living on, protein shakes and berries or whatever their, particular thing is. That our bodies aren't designed to do that. And we're also not designed to be totally overstimulated 24/7. We're designed to be in community together,
Yeah.
in nature, having a lovely time, not attached to our phones. And when I ask my clients to show me their screen time, well, let's just say that's absolutely shocking because clearly they don't show it to anybody else. So we begin to see a picture of a very overstimulated individual who is running constantly and very afraid. You can't go home anymore and shut the door because there your
Mm.
phone is pinging, you're on Instagram, you're seeing beautiful people all over the place, you're feeling very unsafe and inadequate. And
Yeah.
I think it's a very sad place for us to have found ourselves at the moment.
Yeah. We cannot survive on all this adrenaline and cortisol download.
No.
And we weren't meant to. As I said, we were meant to occasionally meet a saber-toothed tiger or something, but we this level of hypervigilance, and when you see people that present with what they call ADHD, they're very hypervigilant, and it goes back to the secure attachment. If the child is securely attached, and it was very interesting. The guy interviewing her, Stephen Bartlett, said, "It sounds like you're blaming the parents," and she said, "I am. It's a very inconvenient truth, and that's brave to say that nowadays." She said, "I am, because we have got to stay home with our children for the first 3 years." And
Yeah.
remember, I said earlier, all the experts say you get the first 3 years right, and the rest of it is pretty easy. There will be challenges, but the child has got to feel safe.
Yeah.
And when we don't feel safe, we go out into the world and everything is dangerous. Even things that aren't dangerous,
Well,
we
that's right.
be dangerous.
And we're straight back to the work of John Bowlby, which is, years and years old. We do need to be nurturing and providing this feeling of secure attachment.
Hmm.
And for anybody who has a small child at the moment, there's also a tendency to overstimulate your child. And I
Yeah.
raised my children in the Gina Ford era, and she said, let them cry. Now, that's changed dramatically in the last 20 years. But then you've got the opposite end where they're totally overstimulated, they can't be left alone, and
Yeah.
these children are overstimulated and hypervigilant at a very, very young age, and that doesn't bode well moving forwards.
No.
Michelle, can I just ask you something, or just mention something? You talked about adrenaline and cortisol, and you talked about the saber-toothed tiger. And of course, what we were designed to do is we ran away from the saber-toothed tiger. The adrenaline and cortisol surged. Our blood got thicker. So if the saber-toothed tiger attacked us, we didn't bleed to death so quickly.
Cool fact.
Cool fact. Not cool, but now there is no saber-toothed tiger. We don't run away. The cortisol and adrenaline stays in our body. The blood becomes thicker. And guess what? We end up with massive problems in our arteries because the blood is doing something it shouldn't be doing.
Yes.
This is why it's so important that we work with the mind and the body at the same time to make sure that we are taking preventative action for cardiovascular issues, dementia, making sure that we optimize our sleep, watching our nutrition. And I know people are like, oh, it's all the things, Lindsey, isn't it? Yes, it is all the things and it is daily work. But I'm afraid we're working against our natural state at the moment.
We are, and I live in a city, so it's even more obvious. It's escalated more. The sounds and walking down the street with people that are on their phone and don't look up, and all kinds of first world problems that
Mm.
we have, but they are. And the disconnection of people. And I'm not blaming anything because I think this started way before COVID lockdowns, but I think COVID lockdowns really escalated it because we became afraid of each other. You're going to kill me if I stand too close to you.
Yeah,
That was the subliminal message that we were getting. And sometimes it wasn't very subliminal. It was in our faces. So
absolutely.
now we've got to undo that of coming back to each other, and community and tribes. Still, the research shows that tribes were still the healthiest groups of people. because they were multi-generational in community, singing, dancing together, all of that.
Well, if that's not enough reason for people to go on a retreat, I think I don't know what else would, but that is an incredible experience people can have to help reconnect with that
Yeah,
group. Um, the work of Gabor Mate, of course, is very much focused around learning from these generations, not learning from our peers, and that for me as a parent has been a transformational thought piece. Michelle, you and I both are part of the women's chapter as well. And I just wanted to give a quick shout out to networking and communities. If you are listening and you're not in a network, please join one. And if you're in a network and it's not absolutely filling your soul, find another one. Because you and I have connected a number of times now through that
yeah,
group. And it's so nourishing and it's so important to be able to feel like we can share this sort of conversation in a safe space. And here we are today actually sharing this conversation publicly.
I
So
know.
thank you so much. I want to ask you one final question because it's something that comes up a lot for me in my practice and for myself, and it's about relationship with self. And I recently did a podcast on the ego of philanthropy and why people give to make themselves feel better. And we often serve other people and fix other people to make ourselves feel better because we haven't worked out how to make ourselves feel better ourselves. Can you please just say a little bit about that and what you might say to clients who begin to realize that actually they don't think very much of themselves and they're then behaving in a way that's not very helpful on the outside?
I I'm thinking of a specific situation, which I probably can talk about, but I had a client a while back that I don't see him anymore, but he was what I would say quite a people pleaser. So he would be very high, high performing, overachieving, and he would get asked to do things like big things for free, like charitable work. And he would say yes and then regret every minute of it because he didn't have the physical, emotional bandwidth capacity to do it. I hope I'm answering your question here. And so we went back. For me, it's always really the same journey going back to the first or last time you noticed this. And he became very specific. He was 10 years old, and I won't go into all of it, but there was a lot of chaotic landscape, I'll call it, in the family, divorce and fighting over custody and things like that. Anyway, he realized that that made him feel good when he helped others, which is beautiful. And being a people pleaser is beautiful, guys. I'm not in any way saying anything against it until it gets in your way. And what is really happening is it is a childlike behavior developed in childhood, and we go into a default with it. It becomes muscle memory. We don't question it. It's just who we are. And the more we do it, and this is the conversation I was having with him, I said, I don't live your life, but I know you give out an energy that when people look around the room, they look at that guy and know he'll get the job done because he's capable and he's flexible and I'll do it. Sure, give me something to do, even though I've got a full-time job and a family. So anyway, we got into this sort of where this pattern began because we are all patterns, beliefs, values, and he began to see it. And he saw it as a 10-year-old. And we then went into communication with the 10-year-old. Our parts are always happy to show up because it's like, well, finally you found me. I've been in the dark here. Finally you see me and you hear me and you acknowledge me. I'm exhausted. They're usually very exhausted parts, right? So what we've done, and he continues to do it, is to well, this is the metaphor I use, Lindsay. There's a door in your room right now. There's got to be, because you wouldn't have been able to get in the door, right? So imagine there's a knock on the door. You open the door, and there's a very young little girl who's very distressed. What would you do? This isn't a test because I pretty much know what you're going to say. But what would you do if there was a distressed child on the other side of the door?
I'm going to comfort that child every single time.
Okay. So you're not going to shout at the child.
Obviously not.
You're not going to slam the door on the child.
No, it's a child who's distressed.
Okay. Guess what we do to ourselves?
I
We
know
shout
exactly what
at
we do.
ourselves. We slam the door on ourselves and we go, not this again. When am I going to meet somebody, or when am I going to get over this thing, or when am I not going to fall into this pit of flattery and hooking up with the wrong person, even if it's platonic, all of those things. So what we do is we abandon ourselves every single time. But if a small child came to the door and it was a total stranger, you would be like, oh, come in, have a seat, let me get you a glass of water. You want a hug? That's what we need to do for ourselves. And I know I'm making it sound very simple, but what I said, this is my takeaway. When you get up in the morning, before your feet touch the ground, just lie there with your eyes closed. Just scan your body from the top of your head to the tip of your toes, and just notice if there's anything activated inside of you. Even when you wake up, there can be activations because you know about, well, you do heart rate variability, so I'm sure you see some of this stuff. And just connect, hold a space physically, put your hands on that space, wherever that space is, and just say, I see you, I hear you, I accept you just the way you are. And then you can say one or two more things like, is there anything you want to say to me? Do you need anything today? Just very
Beautiful.
simple. It takes less than a minute. And a lot of times we'll be okay. We'll be good to go. But there will be times where, you know what? You're doing too much. You're doing way too much. And I'm exhausted trying to protect you. I can't do this anymore. Right? So what we want to do is we don't want to fire our parts or retire our parts. We just want to take some of the burden off them because they're running on a 10-year-old mind, and we're 50, 60, 70, 20, whatever. We have a lot more knowledge, information, and tools. And now we can take over a bit and do it differently and give that child a break.
That is beautiful. Just listening to ourselves is so, so important. And it couldn't be any more timely, Michele, that a client of mine this morning went through the inner child um, process with me and as part of sophrology. It's an advanced relationship now with this client, but it's so important, and the work is transformational.
It is.
Michele, it's been an incredible joy and blessing to talk to you today.
Good.
And I do want to just ask you to share with our listeners some of the resources that they can access and how they might go about doing that.
Right. We'll probably put a link in the text. Yeah.
In the show notes, absolutely.
Okay. Um, I have a couple that I'd love to share with you. One is everything starts with awareness. So I think it's the biggest piece of healing. My four steps to healing are awareness, acceptance of self, which can be very radical. Sometimes it needs to be very radical. We have to say, this is where I am in the moment, not forever. And with awareness and acceptance, we have consciousness. We have more consciousness because we spend a lot of our day in a fairly unconscious state, as I'm sure you know. And the fourth pillar is choice. And then we have a choice. We can go, okay, I'm going to do the same thing, but I have more knowledge and information, or I'm going to do things differently. So between stimuli and response, Viktor Frankl, a very famous quote, there is a space, and in that space we get to choose. And in that choice, we can set ourselves free. I'm paraphrasing that. So I have this 30-day workbook on self-awareness. It doesn't have to be done in 30 days, but some people like that accountability, so it's up to you. So we will put a link to that. And we've just published a 30-day narcissistic abuse recovery workbook. And I'm really passionate about this because I'm a narcissistic abuse survivor and not a victim. And it is possible. And we talked a little bit about attachment style. And what I really want to say, which is so hopeful, attachment style is not like an astrological sign. It's not fixed, and you can heal from it. And that is what I think is so exciting because we have neuroplasticity and all those beautiful things in the brain. And I was disorganized attachment, which is one of the more difficult ones, and I'm much more secure now. It's like a pie, they're little pieces of this, but you want to move it more towards the secure part of the pie, and it is possible. And
It's
these
amazing.
resources will help you.
So all the links will be in the show notes. Michele, it's been just a fabulous opportunity to connect. And I can't wait to see you again in person, because the beauty of this, of course, is that we have met in person a couple of times now, which is, it gives us such a much more deeper quality of conversation. Um, there's nothing else to say apart from thank you very much. I hope everybody has enjoyed the show. Please do, of course, leave a review. And until next time, Michele, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me.